and it's the end of 2024. This is the perfect time for this. Let's dive into the specifics. Well, first of all, the future of cybersecurity seems to be bright. We are at an exciting crossroad when it comes to our discipline. Innovations are not just keeping and happening at a very fast pace, but also we see collaboration, and we see also cybersecurity being a business enabler. This wasn't the case 10, or for those old enough, 20 years ago. So cybersecurity is now becoming part of everyday conversations. We see it in the news, it's in people's minds. And yes, it typically involves answering questions about how to manage people's passwords and what MFA or 2FA seems to be. Together, I think through innovation, collaboration, and resilience, we're building a world where cybersecurity is not only a necessity, but also a strategic advantage. Those that implement it right have been through the passage of asking very hard questions for their organizations or sectors or even countries. And that's why we believe that the future is bright. And as the future might be bright, PowerPoint seems to be stuck. So give me 1 second, please. There we are. It's advancing to the next slide. Maybe it's not so bright. The future also seems to be purple. And for those of you that remember the ad campaign of "The future is bright, the future is orange" about 10 years ago, what do we mean by purple? Well, when you see the likes of Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, testifying in front of Congress, and when he's being grilled on topics of how secure and safe ChatGPT 4 at the time was, he was basically quoting how he commissioned a number of extensive red team tests for ChatGPT 4.0. Congressman, we tested ChatGPT in terms of red team engagements for 6 months, to paraphrase what his response back was to that question. And what you see in front of you is a number of executive orders in the US, and also other regions have this, whereby terminology that we use day to day, penetration testing, red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, seems to now becoming part of the norm. Techniques that we know and use in our day-to-day cybersecurity lives are infiltrating parts of society. And with that comes the need for our evolution in terms of what the next generation of a chief information security professional, penetration tester, red teamer, but also the defensive aspects of a SOC analyst and so on are going to be shaped to be. So this is what we're going to investigate, and this is what we mean by the future is purple. It means that we have embraced the topics of red teaming and active exercises whereby we're testing our defenses, and we are now complementing those with blue team activities, hence the reference to purple team testing. And if currently this year and the previous year we're discussing red team hitting the mainstream, my prediction is that for 2025, purple teaming is going to become part of the norm as well. So with that comes the need to evolve our principles, our foundations, if you like. And I want to take you through 3 next generation cyber principles that build on the traditional principles like confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the CIA triad. Those of us who endured the 6-hour CISSP exam that Sofiane referenced had to basically endure. But we must also adopt and forward think towards frameworks such as the DIE triad, distributed, immutable, and ephemeral systems. And we're going to look at this in some detail in the slides to come, because the way that the world is evolving, it's good to have that foundation of need to know, but those basic concepts are no longer good enough. We need to evolve with the times. So starting with one of the 3 principles that I want to instill on you today as part of this opening section of the presentation, distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. This emerges as a compelling alternative to the CIA triad. It builds on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What we're discussing is embracing the principles of distributed design, avoiding having any single point of failure. Immutability ensures that once data is written, it cannot be altered, safeguarding against unauthorized access. And then also, lastly, ephemerality advocates for a limited lifespan of data, thus reducing the exposure to risks. So when this was developed as a concept, the power of the triad lies in its ability to lessen the security burden and drive through resiliency. This is what's basically driving us towards anti-fragility. And what we're trying to do is apply these principles in addition to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. By applying this principle with commonly available tools and design patterns, we can tackle challenging and scalability related problems that touch on a little bit of resiliency, a little bit of privacy, and many aspects of practical and efficient ways that we're basically going to be asked to be doing cybersecurity in years to come, not just next year, but in future years as well. Second on the list of principles to take away, the need to have available principle. We all know the need to know principle. The need to have available principle, a principle that I had the opportunity to work on a few years back as part of an ISACA publication, is a refined take on data access. It transcends the traditional need to know by advocating for the relinquishment of access roles. We're basically giving up access roles when we don't need them in an almost semi-dynamic way, once they are no longer required based on our next set of premeditated tasks. The objective is to minimize the risk window and, completely eradicate concepts such as ransomware attacks and similar. In practice, this principle requires robust monitoring and management of access rights, and not many organizations have achieved that level of maturity. This is why it's a future-related cyber principle. Its implementation not only tightens security, but also simplifies the management of permissions, making it a vital principle in modern cybersecurity strategies. To give you if you can go on mute while we're on. Can you hear me okay? Yes, I assume you can. So I think the objective with this principle is to be able to effectively show how we manage access rights. And when it comes to, for example, training large language models, this principle gives us the perspective, which is very important, to have access to the LLM, train it, but also then relinquish that access because of the principle of need to have available. Next on our list, last of the three principles, and let me check if I can advance to the next slide. Yes, I can. Very good. The decoupling principle is the concept of minimal knowledge. Systems should not know things that they are not required to know, data that they don't need to know. If you like, systems should know as little as possible to perform their functions. This principle is particularly relevant for cloud services, where data privacy is also paramount. The principle advocates for the separation of data modes with direct applicability in data in motion, data in rest, and data in use. And these are different modes. When I was doing the data lifecycle management wheel of death, sometimes we called it at the time, we didn't have this decoupling of each of the phases. Organizational decoupling further reinforces the need to basically divide private information among different entities, ensuring that no single organization holds the entirety of sensitive data. This is really important in the future of cybersecurity because this segmentation significantly mitigates the risk of total data exposure in the event of a breach. So we're basically reinforcing those concentric circles that we had in the onion approach of architectures beforehand through principles now. So with that in mind, we've seen three cyber principles that we predict that are going to come our way at a very fast pace in next year, in 2025. For the next section of this presentation, and there's only three parts of the presentation, I want to take you through the CISO role, compare it with what's to come in future years versus now. The Chief Information Security role has shifted focus on resilience in 2015, 10 years ago, to a leadership role, basically driving innovation in 2025. In 2015, CISOs were primarily reactive, while in 2025, they're an integral part, embedding security into everyday aspect of business. It's no longer about 2FA, it's about fostering agility and enabling innovation. And this wasn't the case 10 years ago. So the four pillars that I picked here to explore as part of areas of understanding how the CISO role continues to evolve are on your screen. From cyber resilience to innovation leadership. Here we see the role that has transformed dramatically, over the last decade. Modern CISOs must not only safeguard operations, but must also drive innovation and enable business growth. All of a sudden, we have resilience, which has evolved from simply recovering after an attack to shaping the agility and embedding security into everyday aspects of the organization and the business. CISOs today are innovation leaders, driving secure AI adoption as one example, fostering trust through secure by design principles, and also dealing with those monolithic apps that nobody talks about while we try to move to the cloud. These challenges grow very quickly. So as we have shifting priorities and increasing complexity, like managing hybrid workforces, combating AI-driven threats, securing IoT ecosystems, the demand both on technical expertise and strategic vision is only increasing. So cybersecurity, once viewed as a cost center, is now recognized as a business enabler. Who would have thought of that 10 years ago, right? We were striving for that, and all of a sudden we have it right now. What do we do with it? Well, our objective is to be able to strengthen, as cybersecurity leaders, the landscape and be able to deal with the rise of attacks that are continuously evolving. Think of the attacks that are due to come. We have AI-driven attacks, supply chain risks, back attacks, and of course, quantum computing just around the corner. So already organizations are storing encrypted data for the purpose of making sure that they have the ability to then decrypt it later on when it comes to breaking traditional cryptographic techniques that we use today as quantum computers evolve. We also have a dynamic environment for the CISO role. That hasn't changed. So let's look at the details and compare and contrast for each of these four pillars, what was happening 10 years ago in 2015 versus what's happening now and what will be happening in the years to come next year. So if we look at cyber resilience, innovation leadership as a journey, the CISO role in 2015 basically had resilience as an emerging concept. Cyber resilience was just an add-on to resilience, and it focused on maintaining core operations during and after an attack, being able to withstand an attack. Organizational resilience was largely reactive, with recovery plans often disconnected from broader business strategies. Cyber resilience efforts were confined within IT disaster recovery rather than the holistic enterprise approaches. Well, that's no longer the case. 2025 has a different role for resilience. Now resilience shapes not only the organization's resilience, but also the agility in responding to disruption and emerging opportunities. We're talking about integrating resilience into every aspect of the business, from the supply chain, third and even fourth party risk, customer-facing innovations. And of course, now the CISO and the broader security teams have a role in innovation. We're driving new revenue streams by looking at how to embed cybersecurity at a foundational level. Don't go very far. Just look at AI-based platforms, LLMs being used or not used. The collaboration required in order to assess the risks and assign ownership at the C-suite level has basically improved dramatically in terms of security being accelerated through the ranks. And we're no longer hindering innovation, we're enabling that digital transformation that's happening within our business. That's basically pillar one. Second pillar that we have is the dynamic challenge. If you ask any CISO, and I've had the pleasure of being a chief information security for a number of years in a couple of different countries, we have always to deal with that shifting, change of priorities. So we have increasing complexity. You come into work one day, you expect to do X, but you end up doing Y. This focus back in 2015 was primarily concentrated on technical controls, compliance, standardization, preparation for GDPR if you're related to Europe around May 2018. And the challenges basically included limited visibility of the evolving threats, reactive posture due to the lack of advanced threat intelligence, and also gaps in integrating cybersecurity within the business strategy. That's no longer the case. 2015 is a different ballgame. The focus now balances on technical and business leadership roles while addressing hybrid work models. That's a residue of COVID, of course. We also have IoT, OT, operational environments, and AI threats. Challenges are much, much deeper now. So combating an AI-driven, DDoS attack or even deep fakes. Imagine having the CEO of a company having videos being made that are, either basically causing a reputational damage to the company, or even worse, what we saw in Asia Pac, whereby a transfer of 20 million US dollars was made because of a fake conference call. A bit extreme, but this has happened and it is a challenge. We're, of course, now managing not only our risks, but the risks of our supply chain due to expanded digital ecosystems. Don't go very far. We have in Europe the ISC2 directive, and we also have the specifics in and around how any supplier that's impacting critical national infrastructure is now part of that ecosystem. That was not the case 10 years ago. Of course, we have also the need to keep this friendly, right? You can't have people at home working remotely behind 3 factors of authentications. It's just not going to work. So this is now a topic that has a number of opportunities. We're talking about how to leverage machine learning for predictive threat modeling, how to automate our processes and automate our responses, where we can enhance collaboration at a board level, at a team level, and how to embed security in a digital transformation so that we don't have to be there all the time. That's what's coming our way at 100 miles an hour when it comes to this second pillar of dynamic challenges when it comes to 2025. Of course, cybersecurity is now a business enabler. Yes, it was a business enabler back in 2015, but the perception of cybersecurity was often seen as a cost center, creating friction between relevant business operations. We want to put, our data on remote devices. We want to be able to do things that are outside of policy. That was the case 10 years ago. And the role was much more supporting IT-driven projects while addressing compliance-related security requirements. There were opportunities missed because of the involvement or lack of involvement in product innovation or customer trust initiatives, which were very minimal 10 years ago. 2025 has a different role when it comes to cybersecurity being a business enabler. Perception is that now cybersecurity is recognized as a competitive advantage for those that have it. The role of the Chief Information Security Officer is integral to driving the digital value chain and enabling secure cloud migrations, also AI adoption and customer trust building. We didn't have that 10 years ago. The business was not coming our way saying, how do we do this securely? So from an opportunity perspective, 2015 is going to actively involve shaping business offerings and also applying secure by design principles like the ones that I referenced earlier. Strengthening the brand reputation by demonstrating transparency is going to be key when it comes to implementing cybersecurity measures. It's not just what measures you have, but also how are you perceived? How do you react at an organizational level when the tweet comes along and it's actually something that's impacting your reputation, but not your controls? So we're going to see a different side of business enablement required in 2025 compared to the evolving landscape 10 years ago. Finally, safeguarding against the evolving threat landscape. Back in 2015, the threat environment was predominantly a traditional list of malware. We had the first type of ransomware type of attacks, phishing and DDoS attacks being orchestrated. Responses relied on firewalls, antivirus, SIEM tools, EDR, and there were many limitations of visibility, where we deployed EDR, where we didn't, limitations of collaboration between organizational units, and also sharing of information was not that transparent between different groups when it came to threat intelligence, TI. Well, now we see a different environment against our response to the evolving threat landscape. The CISO of 2025 will have to look at the threat environment and cater for AI-driven attacks, supply chain compromises. One of your suppliers has a business email compromise, and that is now being fed back. Let alone think more strategically about the use of crypto when it comes to quantum computing related risks. The response involves XDR. So we have extended detection response now capabilities. We have behavior analytics. We have insider threat type programs, topics that were not being discussed heavily 10 years ago. 10 years ago, yes, we did have zero trust architectures, but they were much more theoretical. There wasn't an implementation guide on how to spin up an Amazon cluster that actually catered for Lambda servers with zero trust architecture. And of course, the opportunities involve leveraging blockchain when it comes to supply chain security, leveraging AI for continuous adaptive threat detection and response, and similar. So we're basically now being asked to use also the tools that are being catered, and we're being attacked by those tools and techniques for our defenses in a much more proactive way. This is how the evolving landscape of threats is changing and how it's basically moved on by a number of light years compared to 10 years ago. If you were a CISO 10 years ago and a CISO today, you're basically being asked to use a different set of tools in your arsenal. AI was nowhere to be found. It was part of the innovation team, and it involved some basic, NLP programs. That's no longer the case. As part of the final aspect, the third and final aspect of this presentation, I always like to look at the year to come in a top 10 of strategic priorities. And with each of these, there is a strategic priority that I like to predict, and then the question that is going to be posed to the security teams, the security leadership of an organization or a sector when it comes to how that strategic priority will surface in 2025. So let's look at each of the top 10. Number one, embedding cybersecurity or security as a whole now within the organization DNA that we have. The question is, what steps are you taking to basically achieve that embodiment, right? What is it that is going to drive your operations and culture beyond mere compliance, beyond that we put it in a policy, beyond the fact that it's in law? It's now easier to embed security in the organization through gamification, by taking advantage of topics that are in the news, in the daily news, not cybersecurity news. So this is something that's going to come back and over again, replacing the traditional cybersecurity awareness or similar topics, the embedding aspect of security within the DNA of an organization. Number two, the dynamic risk frameworks. It used to be the case, for those of us, old enough, showing our age here, that you had a high, medium, low. You were following, a NIST or an ISACA or a COBIT or ISO 27001 to 27002 risk strategy, and you were able to deal with categorizing the risk. Well, we're now seeing the embodiment of dynamic risk frameworks. What does that mean? It means, well, try and rate a risk from a impact likelihood perspective when it comes to an LLM swearing back at one of your clients, right? It's not really something that you can do with a traditional risk framework. And here the question is, how are you aligning risk management with real-time business needs while ensuring that your organization remains competitive? This embodiment of dynamic risk frameworks is becoming part of the norm. It's no longer valid to just say, oh, this is going to be a black swan event. It will no longer need to cater it. The entirety of technology these days is a black swan event. We don't know what AI we're going to be using tomorrow, let alone what we used this week as an organization. Different organizations now have, subscriptions to Perplexity, to Anthropic, to OpenAI, to Copilot, right? And that is going to change over time. And that's where the requirement for dynamic risk framework stems from. Number three, we always fought for board level engagement when it came to cyber risk. Now we're discussing the ownership of the risk. It's no longer valid to just have the CISO own all those risks. How are you fostering stronger accountability and actionable insights at the C-suite level when it comes to making cybersecurity a business priority? It's very easy to say, well, we need to have, an LLM as part of our production to be able to basically respond back to customer queries. It's going to save us money. But then who owns the risk that I referenced before, whereby that LLM starts swearing back at a customer or a prospect? And whose risk is it? Is it the team that trained the LLM? Is it the team in operations? Is it within the cybersecurity function? Is it the data analytics team, scientists? Where does that risk go, and how do we define that accountability? This is going to be a key challenge. Number three is going to be a key challenge for CISOs when it comes to risk ownership at a C-suite level. Why? Because up until now, it was about finding one person that owned the risk. Now that risk disseminates different functions. It will be partially owned by the COO, the CTO, and the CRO, for example, right? That was no longer the case a few years back. That was completely different. So number three, board level cyber risk ownership is going to be big in 2025. Number four, the adaptive strategies to having a hybrid workforce. Yes, we've all returned to work. This is no longer about, which days are you returning home and working from home for a couple of days, and then you're in the office. But we see the hybrid work model solidify. People who are traveling are expected to have access to the specific needs that they have in order to be able to work remotely. And we need to be able to secure what we call a fluid workforce across different geographies. Think about what that means in traditional IP filtering terms in the firewall, where you used to basically ban a set of regions or IP addresses, and you were able to block, how your workforce basically accessed the work environment. We see this changing over time. So number four, a lot of adaptation is going to be needed at a strategic level on how the workforce remains hybrid, because they're going to need that. Number five, halfway there, AI-driven incident response. For those of you that have teams of responders within your ranks, hands up. I definitely have teams of responders within our ranks. And the question is how quickly we can react to an incident when you go through that painful phase of incident detection, response, and also partially recovery. You can now take a sample of malware and very easily assess whether or not it involves being a targeted attack against your organization or something that's been custom made. This was always the case. We always had virus total and similar upload functionalities. But now that embodiment of AI-driven incident response is becoming part of reality. And let's face it, we barely have good run books, let alone run books that, are able to withstand the challenge of a good responder set of actions. Now we're being asked to evolve those in light of AI and how we leverage, basically, when do we use AI, when don't we use AI? Think of also the privacy concerns that come with potentially uploading the wrong sample that involves something proprietary about your organization. So it's not just the case of just using AI, but also knowing when to use and when to say no to the use of artificial intelligence in how we respond to an incident. Same goes with Bitcoin wallets. Same goes with ransomware. Same goes with payments that involve those wallets. So there's an aspect of AI-driven response that, again, is going to be key in 2025. Number six, the overall adoption of artificial intelligence within the organization. It's very easy to block at the web application, proxy, the firewall, the use of, chat.openai.com. That's no longer valid. It's no longer valid to say that we have a potential DLP, data leakage prevention risk, and therefore we're going to, not have access to a specific set of LLMs. People are trying to use artificial intelligence tools for good purposes. Think of your development teams, for example. They could leverage Copilot for good reason, right? But at the same time, Copilot has had a few risks there. And we've spent a lot of time pinpointing how to do secure prompt engineering. So the overall adoption of artificial intelligence within the organization, within the masses of the organization, is going to be a hot topic in 2025. Beforehand, we were being asked at a CISO level to basically enable the use of AI for specific teams, right? Think of a bank, dealing with fraudulent transactions, as an example of retail banking. That is one department and one case. But now it's about secure AI adoption across the firm. And this now has the question of how do you allow AI to be used without stifling creativity and innovation within your organization. Number 7 in our top 10 of what's to come in 2025, talent upskilling in cybersecurity. I don't know about you, but I'm having a difficult time keeping track with artificial intelligence changes. And this comes from someone who's unfortunately spent time in, getting a doctorate and building AI algorithms that basically were solving problems that we couldn't solve analytically. Still, I don't feel comfortable in this space, right? I go home and I try to spend as much time as possible in building and upskilling what I know about what's happening in the space of cybersecurity and the use of AI there. All you have to do is go to GitHub and look for things like Evil GPT, basically all the unfiltered GPTs that are out there, the ones that don't have prompts for safety and security. And we're going to have a number of initiatives of this type that are going to come our way when we have a big technological change as we have now, be it in AI or otherwise. The question that you're going to be asked in 2025 is how are the next pipeline of skilled cybersecurity professionals in a highly competitive market remaining skilled and competitive? How are we actually achieving that? And that's going to be a difficult question to answer. It's no longer about the 80-20 rule, but it's about how they're learning as part of their day-to-day activities. Number 8, orchestrating automation and basically acting on human intelligence. How are you fine-tuning the interplay between automated secure tools and human expertise? It used to be the case that the least technical people would do the vulnerability scanning and you would have a specialized penetration testing team, and even the more specialized folk would be part of red team testing. That's no longer adequate. Everyone needs to know basically what it is that fine-tuning interplay is between even running a basic Nessus scan all the way up to a red team exercise that involves your domain controller. And this is now part of the norm. You're expected to basically be automating things as part of cost saving in a much more drastic way. This was not the case a few years back, let alone 10 years back. The vulnerability management team did one thing, the penetration testing team did another thing, the SOC did a third thing, and the red team was just responsible to just cause havoc and break everything within scope. And now what we're seeing is that automation is everywhere. We see this as part of each of the activities that I previously referenced. So this handover between human and machine in cybersecurity is going to be something that we spend a lot of time in terms of orchestration in 2025. One before the last one, advanced threat intelligence. I'm not, the thrill seeker for buzzwords. We used to have threat intelligence, then we had cyber threat intelligence, now we have ATI, advanced threat intelligence. But basically, any intelligence has an action behind it. And if you're not acting on the intelligence that you receive, well, then it's not intelligence, right? It's something else. It's just a pretty report. How are you harnessing the predictive analytics and threat intelligence to proactively counter the attacks out there? And let's face it, there are very new attacks out there. The advanced persistent threat groups are just growing in numbers. Some of them are even state-sponsored, and they have more than one state behind them. So there is a need to basically upskill in the threat intelligence domain. Think of the example I gave you before, whereby we're saying that organizations are storing encrypted SSL traffic. This is traffic on AES-256 with cryptographic keys using ecliptic curve cryptography, unbreakable to our knowledge today. And they're storing it with the objective to then decrypt it 10 or 15 years ahead of now. This is now requiring advanced threat intelligence to how we counter this element of what is advanced threat intelligence. Last but not least, well, I couldn't, say that we have a top 10 if quantum was not on the list. This is now not just a buzzword. For the first time this year, we had quantum-related algorithms in key exchange being proposed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, and at the same time, one of the finalists being broken by a research institute, a university in Belgium. This hasn't happened before. If we look at, how DES was developed, AES was developed, and other standards. So there is an active need to engage with this post-quantum security era. And the question that you're going to be asked is, what strategies are you developing to address the dual challenges of quantum computing risks and also the proliferation of traditionally encrypted data, the classical crypto ecosystems? How are you dealing with those? This is going to be another question that's going to come our way in the top 10 for 2025. Okay, so with that in mind, we've been through an early phase of why the future is bright and it's a little bit purple, as per the colors on this slide. We've also been through and looked at some modern, let's say, contemporary cybersecurity principles, a little bit beyond the CIA triad and similar. And then we finished with a top 10 list of what's to come in 2025. Maybe there's an 11 on that list. I was very tempted to add things like drones and EMP attacks, but the physical is becoming quite real as well. So please note that that list is not definite, right? And I welcome back any challenge on what your top 10 is. There's no one list that is accurate. It's also good to share back what we thought the top 10 was going to be for 2024 and what it turned out being. And I can tell you right now, nobody was predicting AI to continue on this steep innovation curve. So in conclusion, cybersecurity is everywhere. It's not necessarily done right. And please embrace this opportunity. It's not going to last forever. We now have the spotlight on us. For those of us who've been around long enough, we didn't have this beforehand. We were always asking for it. And now finally the opportunity is here. So try to address cybersecurity in the right way by embracing new principles. Try and embrace this opportunity by not shying away from the challenges that are going to come our way, be it quantum, AI, IoT, drones, or similar. And please note there's an expiry date by which point certain aspects of cybersecurity are going to become commoditized. It's not going to last forever. So let's try to utilize our time in the best optimum way. With that in mind, Sofiane, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you, Yanis, for this brilliant talk. Let's check the question on the chat. The first one is probably a common question, which is raised by many local organizations in Algeria suffering from a lack of resources. The question is, DPO can be handled, is the DPO function role can be handled by CISO for small organization with limited resource?
The answer is yes, but you need to have that segregation of duties then applied for a single person. And that's always difficult, right? So I've known many organizations where the CISO and the DPO are one and the same. I know many organizations where they've even had that and they're ISO 27001 compliant, and they have no problem with their ISMS. But let's face it, every year they have to go through the process and demonstrate that due diligence, whereby it's not the same person who is basically making that statement about cybersecurity that is also making the statement for data protection without having elaborated on how and who is keeping them in check. So one very simple way is that for cybersecurity duties, you report to operations, and for anything data protection related, you go into the legal and you have that dual dotted reporting line with listed roles and responsibilities. Please note that this is also an argument to go back to your organization and say, well, actually, we need another headcount, because if we look at how much time we're going to be spending showing that we have the segregation of duty for one person, this is now going to basically justify getting an additional headcount for a data protection officer.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, what role governance should be playing in managing the 2025 cyber security landscape?
Very good question. So if we look at, for example, the NIST cybersecurity framework, we're having a brief conversation with Sofiane about that just got released in version 2.0. And it's not that I'm only a fan of US related standards, but they have a certain history with them and cadence. Governance is now a key pillar. It's the inner circle. I cannot stress how important governance is going to be. And it's not just governance, it's lean governance, right? Let's be clear. So if you're having monthly meetings that are not adding value, cancel them. but make sure that you have a lean governance in place. Also, you don't need a monthly meeting if nothing is changing. Maybe you need to change the cadence. Now we have a number of governance frameworks that are at disposal that allow for this, cater for this, all the way from COVID, going to NIST, going to how we manage, for example, according to the EU AI Act, risks relating to artificial intelligence in Europe. So this agility was not in place beforehand. We had to set up governance that was very set. And you need to have a steering committee and a working committee and specific things. Agility is going to be key in governance. And where to start? If there's a meeting that's not adding value, change the meeting, change the terms of reference, go through the process of going through the stakeholders and asking for feedback on how to improve the governance and ideally save everyone time. A real important question here is, well, if we have all the stakeholders from a governance perspective attending, but we're not able to answer a question, but the meeting is costing in terms of time X amount of dollars, right, or euros to the company, but is not providing an output, then why the heck do we have the meeting? We need to adjust the governance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Another question from Jamal on governance as well. From governance perspective, role and responsibility and separation of duty, what do you think about some top management people pushing to put all the security operation, deployment, configuration, maintaining the security solution under the CISO responsibility, shift from CIO, who is handling the overall IT infrastructure, to CISO? I suppose there is a conflict of interest since CISO is more a GRC function than an operation one.
Yes, very good question. So look, you're probably right, Gemma, in terms of what you asked, but notice that you are, by using the term GIC, I know that you are ahead of what your organization's maturity is, right? So you're probably thinking of the organization of where it's going to be next year or in 5 years' time. But for now, take it on, right? Because the next step of maturity is, and unfortunately, this is how it goes. The CIO hands over to the CISO. Then we have some sort of outage or incident. We prove that we're building an IT function within the IT function, and then we have the real conversation about what is first line and what is second line responsibilities. But for now, take it on in order to basically drive that dialogue forward, and then be ready to hand it back, in an appropriate time. I've seen this. A classic example is, oh, now that you're the CISO, take on the vulnerability management team. Take on the vulnerability management team, and then we find out that the way that they operate, we don't have those transactional processes within the CISO function. So it's either hand over also what comes with the vulnerability management team, which they're not going to do because it's operations, right? Or take them back. So it's very normal to have these conversations. Don't get frustrated.
Okay. Thank you, Yanis. Another question from Halam. Do you think the rise of AI-driven threat will require organizations to rethink their current incident response plan? What role will human expertise play alongside AI in incident response team of the future?
Short answer is yes. And the role that we're going to play is we're going to be training the more adaptive models in order to justify the fact that we don't have headcount. Unfortunately, that's coming. It's not specific to cyber. It's more broadly specific. So already we have banks of, LLMs or projects if you're using Claude, LLMs, GPTs if you're using OpenAI, whereby you enter all the incidents that you have. These are local instances typically. And you ask, did we respond correctly? Would you change anything in the response plan? How should we revisit this playbook? Jokingly, I still have somewhere the Greek CISO LLM, which is just an open chat, and you probably have the opportunity to set up one for our GILs, given the specifics of your region. Perhaps it responds back in French. I'm not sure, but the short answer is, look, effectively, we're going to be training LLMs in order to do not what the expert job is, but all the grind work. And the grind work in cybersecurity is huge, right? We go through needles, looking for needles in haystacks. And you're going to need AI for that, right? So embrace that as well for different reasons than the previous question. It's not a sign of maturity. Embrace it so that we have the opportunity to train those models in the correct way. And don't fear for your job, because there's so much opportunity in cyber. It's just a case of, so for example, a cyber prompt engineer, right? Job for the future is basically something that's going to come out from you embracing what LLMs are doing today.
Okay, great. Maybe the last couple of questions from Mehdi. The first one is, how can we balance business objective and expectation with regulatory requirement regarding the protection of personal data, data retention, SLA compliance?
Communicate more. Sit around the table with your regulators, sit around the table with your business stakeholders more frequently, have real conversations, and use that awkward feeling that cybersecurity generates when nobody has the gravitas to ask the question in the room. Ask the question, like, where's the data going to be stored? Who's got the encryption keys? Is your expectation that we put everything within our country? Are we going to have basements of monolithic applications, right? So be ready to have that grind feeling in your stomach by increasing frequency, but also asking, the questions that nobody has the gravitas to ask, the difficult questions.
Okay, and the last one, what strategy can organization implement to address the human side of cybersecurity, such as insider threat and social engineering?
You're very fortunate in Algiers because you have a great cybersecurity strategy at a nation level, right? And I would start there. Looking for insider threats in an organization that has no previous history, but also does not have, the ability to run a security operations center, or does not have any SOC capability as a service that is consuming, is probably too advanced. So start with something basic and say the human aspect involves where we are, right, at a nation level. What is our cybersecurity strategy? And then zoom in and be specific, basically. It's also okay to compare that with another nation's strategy. If I look at the UK cybersecurity strategy in its latest iteration, it basically has an offensive risk element, right, of eliminating the threat. We don't have that in Europe, and that's fine because we have a different approach. That immediately drives that human aspect of basically where do I set the bar, right? So start at a national level and zoom in. Maybe it's sectorial, maybe it's specific to your organization, and that will help drive where you set the bar for the human aspect.
Okay, so it's time to wrap up. So thank you, Yanis, for this great talk and exchange, which have brought valuable insight and expertise for the audience. This webinar session records will be available on our LinkedIn chapter page. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yanis, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.